So the next chapter in my book, Dead Celebrities, Living Icons, there's a picture of the book right there, is on President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, who was born in 1917 and was assassinated in Dealey Plaza, as everybody knows, on November 22nd, 1963. And this is the next chapter in the book that occurs after the Marilyn Monroe chapter. And in the chapter is called actually The Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, considered as a case of media warfare. So I don't want to dwell too much on the conspiracy theories involved in the Kennedy assassination, but rather I want to try to see it as a collision between two different types of media: the televisual media of Kennedy versus the audio-acoustic surveillance technologies of the CIA. But we'll get to that in a moment. So John Kennedy was really, the thing about him is that he was the first televisual president, the first president who got into office by means primarily of the projection of his image and the domestication of his image via television into the American home. Television was the new medium in the 50s, and he had been making appearances on television all through the 50s, actually, on Meet the Press, and he would occasionally bring his family on with him. So he had already been using this medium by the time that he got elected in 1961. He entered office January of 1961. And so he'd been using the medium all along. And he is, like Elvis, just as Elvis Presley, at about the same time in 1956, became the first televisual rock star. That is to say that Elvis Presley became the phenomenon that he did become largely as a means of his appearances in 1956, and there were quite a few of them, something like 13 appearances all through the course of 1956, that made him an overnight sensation. It was really television that accelerated his image avatar to light speed and made him instantly famous. And the same thing I think we have to consider with television, with Kennedy, is that television is the main thing that got him into office. And we have to consider the context too, because television is all about images. And the thing about Kennedy was he was the youngest president ever to be elected into office, the 35th president, and he was only about 40, so he was the youngest. And the Cold War landscape at that time was configured largely by all these old men. Everywhere you looked, Khrushchev was old. Lyndon Johnson had already had one heart attack. He was aging. President de Gaulle in France was an old man. So he was surrounded by old men everywhere you looked. Eisenhower. And television tends to favor images of youth. For example, if we compare what happened with, for example, Christopher Cross, you remember him with the song Sailing that was so popular in the late 70s, early 80s, and then when he went on MTV with a music video that showed him, he was overweight, and on the music video it showed him playing the guitar and singing a song, and then the popularity of his song went downhill. So his appearance on MTV actually, because of his image being incompatible with the image modality of television, ruined his career there. So television is a very false, superficial technology that projects and creates two-dimensional, flat, light-speed images, and they tend to favor people with good looks, youthful, attractive, not overweight. All these factors contributed to Kennedy's rise, to putting him into office as the first televisual president. So with Kennedy then, what we really had was the first electronic president. It wasn't the man Kennedy who was put into office, it was his pixelated image. That's what we elected, the pixelated image itself, his electronic avatar. And of course it was completely false. He would appear on talk shows with his family and in spreads in Life magazine with photographs, also photographs. Images generally were the type of technology that favored Kennedy because of his youth and his good looks and his beautiful wife and family. And they were projected as this set of avatars of the ideal American 50s nuclear family. They were perfectly consistent with the way Americans wanted to see themselves at that time. And so all of this favored him and put him into office. It was a complete lie, of course, because Kennedy, for example, had Addison's disease, and there was always something wrong with his back. And in reality, when he wasn't being captured via images in cameras, movie cameras, and television, he was always leaning over painfully against a desk or a chair to prop himself up. So he's somewhat of the archetype of the lame Fisher King who has to be healed. But instead he appeared as, of course, Camelot, the Arthurian world of this wonderful world of new possibilities. America, self-confident, coming to power and seeing itself now as something new and friendly. And so with Kennedy then we have the scaling down of the White House. Now remember, with Walt Disney, what Walt Disney did was he took his scale models of Disneylandia, the little turn-of-the-century models that he had been building in his model train sets, and he scaled them up and turned them into giant three-dimensional. Disneyland is basically a giant three-dimensional toy set that has the paradoxical effect of shrinking the rest of us down to the level of dolls so that we can go play in his play set along with him. With Kennedy, we have the opposite phenomenon. What television did was it took the White House, the three-dimensional actual White House, scaled it down to the level of a scale model, and beamed it via television into the living rooms of all of America. So we get the domestication of the White House, its scaling down and miniaturization, and the insertion for the first time of the presidency into the American home. And so there's a new kind of cozy intimacy that television domesticates. It takes the White House and it domesticates it, puts it into the suburban house, and made everyone feel closer perhaps to the president and his decision-making processes than had ever been the case before. So all of this technology played into his popularity and brought him what he had. But as we've seen, this is a kind of avataric technology. It's two-dimensional, it's false. The three-dimensional reality is sordid and completely different. Kennedy was not faithful to his wife, as is well known. He was a philanderer, not a good father or a good husband at all. He was a philanderer, and Jackie went and did mostly her own thing. She wasn't that much interested in him. So this is what happened with placing him in office. And you can see, as McLuhan used to talk about with the Kennedy-Nixon debates, these are the first televised presidential debates in 1960. Television in that debate, as McLuhan pointed out, favored Kennedy because television, as McLuhan said, is a cool medium. It's a low-resolution image medium that fosters grainy, low-resolution images that require participation on the part of its audience to complete the image. The viewer actually completes the image because it's low resolution, just as with cartoons and comic books. Those are low resolution media, what McLuhan calls cool media, that require participation. And whereas Nixon's personality, Kennedy's personality was of the cool type, very calm, relaxed, insouciant, and television favored that. Whereas Kennedy looked sweaty in the debates, he didn't put makeup on, and he looked bad, he looked nervous, and he looked paranoid. He looked as paranoid in those debates as he actually turned out to be, and that became clear, I think. And McLuhan knew who was going to win that election based on applying this cool versus hot. Television is a cool medium, favoring a cool avatar, but disfavoring the hot, high-definition avatar of Nixon. So that was the first thing. So it put him into office, admittedly by a small margin of only like 100,000 votes, but it helped. And so with him in office then, the first thing about him is that he gets into office, and this image-based type of technology is a type of technology that is profoundly at odds with the technologies of the CIA. Now I think that before Kennedy got into office, there was already this fundamental cleavage between them. The CIA's technologies are the exact opposite of these friendly televisual types of technologies that domesticated the White House. They are technologies, in those days, the CIA was using primarily, the kinds of surveillance technologies that they were using were primarily audio-acoustic. They're always bugging someone. You always see them in the movies, and when you read about them, there's always bugs placed somewhere. They're always listening in on someone somewhere. So CIA surveillance technologies are profoundly invasive. They're audio-acoustic, not image-based back in these days. And you can actually see this if you watch the movie The Good Shepherd, which came out in 2007, I believe, Robert De Niro, which is a CIA biopic. As you watch the entire film, you will not see a camera anywhere in the film. Occasionally you see some photographs as plot points, but there are no cameras in the film, whereas in scene after scene after scene, we see one recording gadget after another. They're constantly recording people's conversations. In 1953, William Harvey masterminded the Berlin Tunnel Project, which involved tapping the phone lines in East Berlin. So everything is audio-acoustic. So we already have a basic disjunction here with Kennedy going into office between these old Cold Warrior types of audio-acoustic technologies, surveillance technologies that invade. These are invasive technologies. They don't contribute to social cohesiveness. They're not participatory. They invade. The CIA, with their satellites going around the Earth, rip off the rooftops of houses, peer down in. They invade. They embarrass. They expose one to the elements. It's an invasive technology. U-2 spy planes. And it steps up a new atmospheric background of paranoia. The Cold War is the age of paranoia because it was the first time that we were surrounded with all these kinds of paranoid technologies. When we look at all the old James Bond films, for instance, with Sean Connery, the first thing he does anytime he walks into a hotel room is he looks for bugs. He's constantly checking behind lampshades, looking for bugs. And this would have been regarded in any epoch prior to the Cold War as proof of a man's insanity, this kind of paranoia. But in the age of the Cold War, it turns out to be proof of the highest mental alertness. So the technology changes the sense ratios and reconfigures whatever age that you're in. And so this is an age of paranoia, and the CIA were the essence of paranoia in these days. Now, the Bay of Pigs, which happened about 100 days into Kennedy being in office, was the first crisis that revealed this schism, this fault line between Kennedy and the CIA. Kennedy failed to provide the necessary backup for the Cuban exiles' invasion into Cuba. They were going to invade in the Bay of Pigs, and Kennedy had been assured by the CIA that the Cuban exiles as well as the Cuban citizens would revolt, rise up, and help the exiles who were invading overthrow the government. No such thing, of course, happened, but primarily due to the failure of Kennedy to provide an airstrike as backup. He was supposed to provide an airstrike that would have bombed the beachhead, where the Cubans had something like 20,000 troops and Russian tanks, and he didn't do this. He changed his mind at the last minute, and the reason he did that was precisely because he was image conscious, and the new image that he wanted to convey to the world, especially via television, of America as a friendly democracy, having good relations with the developing countries. He creates the Peace Corps, and to learn about an American-backed-up invasion of Cuba would at this time have been perceived as something entirely contrary to the image of America that he wanted to project. So he backed out at the last minute, and most of the Cuban exiles, something like 1,200 of the 1,400 total exiles that were sent in there, were taken captives by the Cubans. And that event turned the CIA against Kennedy, as everyone knows. And of course, speaking mythologically, the Bay of Pigs, the pig is a mythological animal which is always associated with the underworld. Pigs are always underworld animals because they root around in the ground, whereas the hawk and the eagle are solar animals. They're associated with the sun. And the pig is the underworld animal, and I think that we can say that in any of the basic conspiracy theories that are later put out surrounding this, they all, in one way or another, trace back the antipathy of the CIA to this Bay of Pigs invasion. So it's almost as though the Bay of Pigs debacle was the event in which the ground fell under from Kennedy's feet, and it opened up a portal to the underworld that created a sucking vortex that doomed him at that moment and ensured that he would be sucked down into the underworld along with the pigs. That's somewhat analogous to when Howard Hughes crashed his XF-11 into Beverly Hills, and when that happened, that event created the sucking vortex in his life, which gradually dragged him down due to the drugs that it hooked him on and slowly ground him up. So this is the Bay of Pigs. This is the vortex that opens up in Kennedy's life and dooms him basically from that moment on by putting him at odds with the CIA. But as we have said, with the two types of technologies, I think Kennedy then proceeded to fire Allen Dulles and General Cabell and Richard Bissell and all these individuals that were involved in the CIA, and he in fact threatened to scatter it into 1,000 famous pieces. So there's the basic antipathy between them, and this is what takes place with the Bay of Pigs. So then we have this antipathy, and as events unfold with Kennedy, we begin to move into a situation where with Dealey Plaza, we have to look at the scenario in Dealey Plaza in terms, I think, not of these conspiracy theories, although I do tend to think that any way we cut it, the CIA was involved with this, and that there probably, most likely, was a conspiracy, but it's very unlikely that we'll ever get down to knowing what the details of it are. The Kennedy conspiracy has spawned more conspiracy theories, perhaps, other than maybe 9/11. That may have it beat, actually. But I don't want to go into all that. I just want to assume, though, that the CIA did have something to do with it, because then that enables us to frame the assassination in Dealey Plaza as a kind of case of media warfare.